Hi everyone, happy Monday. I hope you're having a great day, a great morning, and we are too. We're having a great time here. This is The Wife of Caesar, and my name is Michel Levien or Michel Levien, either is fine. As you know, The Wife of Caesar is Streiner's project to talk about corruption using everyday words so that we can fight corruption in our day-to-day lives using a little bit more than just good intentions. Okay, so as with every program, we will have three sections. The first section will deal with a piece of news. Maybe some are more recent than others, but the main point is that we will talk about a bit of news that is somehow related to corruption or to anti-corruption. Sometimes it'll be more evident than others, but in either way, our goal is to show you why it's relevant to corruption or anti-corruption, and to give you a little bit of our opinion. Great. Then also we will have a second section, and it will deal with the case. Again, the case might be older, might be relatively new, and it will definitely be related to corruption, and you will get our point of view, a small briefing of the case, and our opinion. And thirdly, we will have a typology section in which we will discuss the different ways in which corruption can take place. All right, so let's move on to the news. Today's news will deal with the refinery, the fuel refinery that is set to be built in Mexico in the coming years. So why is this in the news? What's been relevant in the news is that the new federal government of Mexico has decided to build a new gasoline refinery in Mexico and to outsource that project to companies, to most of them foreign companies, who will actually build the refinery. Now, there are essentially two ways in which the federal government of Mexico can do projects like this. The first one is to hold a bid, or sometimes called a tender, which is essentially just an invitation to the public, wherein the government says, if you feel like you can compete in this project, come forward and tender your proposal, and we will pick the best one. And the other way is by private invitation. Both are legal, and they can only be used in certain cases. Private invitations are mostly used, or rather, they are only used by law in situations where the project, or in projects that demand a specific set of skills or technical skills or some proven experience, which this case does. So in this particular case, the government of Mexico decided to issue a private invitation to several foreign companies, so that they could build the refinery. Now, this has been in the news mostly because our Minister of Energy Affairs has publicly stated that the only companies that have been invited are companies with a proven record, who have strong codes of conduct, and who are not involved in acts of corruption. The companies invited are, well, two consortiums. The first one is formed by Bechtel and Technit. The second one is formed by Worley Parsons and the company known as Jacobs, and two other companies. The first one, a French company known as Technip, and I believe a German company known as KBR. These companies have been doing oil refinery projects all around the world, and between the six of them, they have about 100 refineries in their pocket. So why would this be a problem? Well, because the minister said that these companies have a proven track record and are beyond reproach, obviously the thorough journalists decided to research them, and they came upon several claims or several scandals for corruption involving all of these companies. And obviously, people are in social media and in journalism have been complaining against the government, and specifically the declarations or the statements made by our Minister of Energy, saying, well, we all thought that you said that these companies were beyond reproach. And this is one opportunity where this is one of those moments where I'd like to take an opportunity to explain that Streiner and the Wife of Caesar have no political affiliation whatsoever. We are not for the president. We are not against the president, although we question him very, very much. But this is one of those situations where the federal government is doing things right. They are just explaining them wrong. And I will try to do a better job at that. Now, even though these companies have been involved in corruption scandals, which you can very easily research online, they are a good choice for this process, for this invitational process. And I will tell you why. It is very often said that lightning only doesn't strike in the same place two times. And this is one of those situations where that metaphor applies. Because these companies have been involved in such serious corruption scandals, they have been investigated and they have been imposed very, very heavy fines, they are very well positioned to participate in a process because they are heavily guarded, heavily inspected. Now, let me explain this to you using the example of Technip. Technip is a French company, again, in the business of hydrocarbons and building oil refineries. And Technip was charged with paying bribes to foreign officials in several countries of Africa to get contracts for refineries. And they were found guilty. And as a result of that investigation, they were imposed a very heavy fine, and they had to implement a compliance program, which we discuss in every episode of The Wife of Caesar because they are very important. And that compliance program is very likely to be much stronger now after the fact, after the scandal, than it was before. Why? Because those fines, first of all, the amount of the fines depends on the company cooperating and implementing those programs. And secondly, once you've been hit with a fine like that, you never want to be hit again. Why? Because they are the kind of fine that can take a company, even one as big as Technip, to bankruptcy. Okay? So in this particular case, these 6 companies are a relatively safe bet vis-a-vis corruption only. I'm not talking about the technical issues, but specifically concerning the possibility that these companies might engage in corrupt acts, they are a relatively safe bet because they have been hit by lightning before. So this, again, is one of those situations in which the government, the federal government, is doing things that are not improper, but that do seem improper. Why they are doing that, that is a question for you. Okay, so let's move on to the case. Now, today's case you have probably read about in the newspapers. We will be talking about the University of South Carolina. I'm not going to go very deeply into the news because you can read about it pretty much everywhere. The basic facts are that there are 32 people charged with 2 crimes, and the idea is, or the basic notion is, that they paid bribes to officials in the University of Southern California to gain admission or to secure admission for their sons and daughters who did not earn that place. Okay, couple things. The 2 crimes or charges that these people are being indicted with or charged with are, number 1, conspiracy to commit fraud, and number 2, honest services fraud. Let's take them apart one by one. If you'd like, you are very welcome to read all of this, which I would very much not recommend because that's my job, and I'll explain it to you. All right, number 1, conspiracy to commit fraud. Essentially, fraud is, all of this is to say that fraud is acting with deception with the intent to damage someone, generally financially. So if there is deceptive intent and there is financial damage, then very likely you are looking at fraud. When we're talking about conspiracy, we're talking about more than one person getting together to plan and commit the crime. So conspiracy to commit fraud would be one or more persons get together and say, let's, deceive with the purpose, let's, trick someone, deceive someone with the purpose of creating damage, which damage is financially. Okay, that's fairly easy. Almost everybody is somewhat familiar with fraud. This is where it gets tricky. They are also being charged with crime number 2, honest services fraud. Honest services fraud is kind of a catch-all provision. The law, the USC, the law in the United States, basically says when you're talking about fraud, fraud also includes, whenever we discuss fraud, it also includes any act that may deprive another person of fair dealing, honest and transparent services to which they might have been entitled. This is kind of weird. It's very abstract, but the basic notion is if you commit a crime and by committing that crime, someone else is getting screwed, then you're committing honest services fraud. In this particular case, the victims of the alleged honest services fraud are the other students who applied for the school but who did not get in because these people allegedly paid bribes. Okay, so these are the 2 crimes. Again, read them if you want. I would advise against it, but go ahead. Now, there is an ongoing investigation by the authorities, not by journalists, and they will either turn out indictments or not. They will either be taken to trial or not. But one question that a lot of people are asking is, what about the university? Is the university a victim or a criminal? And the answer is kind of disappointing, as it's an answer that we lawyers like to use a lot. It really depends. And it depends on what? Well, compliance. Again, compliance programs, these policies that organizations implement to create an honest culture. Now, the basic idea is that if the University of Southern California is found to have a proper culture, a culture of honesty and transparency, and the investigation turns out that these bribes were paid as an exception, a rogue employee decided to take bribes, then the company, well, not the company, the university will very likely only be charged with a relatively small fine and some penalties, probably strengthening their code of conduct, code of ethics, compliance programs. If, however, the university is found to have a culture of corruption, a culture of non-compliance, then it is very likely that the company itself will be taken to trial and be imposed a very heavy fine. How do you find if a company or if an organization has a culture of corruption? It's relatively complex. Again, it depends, but essentially, if you look at the way the organization does its business, does its work, and from that it is evident to you, and an experienced investigator, it is evident to you that the company doesn't really care about how they do things, but they really only care about results, then you're very likely facing a company or an organization with a corrupt culture. Now, let's move on. Finally, let's move on to the typology. Today, we will talk about a very interesting typology, or a sub-typology. In previous episodes, we have discussed the typology of kickbacks, sometimes also called tithes. You can look them up to see what that is. Now, the typology that we will discuss today is cost inflation. And cost inflation, we say, is the kickback's corrupt cousin. Now, if kickbacks are already pretty bad, cost inflation is just horrible. The way a normal kickback would work is you get a contract if you pay me a bribe, and the value of that bribe is calculated based on a percentage of the value of the contract. So generally 10%. This is where the name comes from. Cost inflation takes it one step further. If you want to receive a contract from me, a corrupt official, then you will have to pay me a bribe. But that bribe is not going to be, 10% of whatever the real value of the contract is. No, that's not enough. So what I will do is I will inflate the actual cost of the contract maybe 2-3 times, and the value or the amount of my bribe is whatever overhead is between the real cost and the inflated cost. So it is, in a way, lying about how much something is worth so that you can pocket the excess amount. So it's a horrible situation. Again, how do you figure that out? Well, mostly by following the money, using the usual techniques that we use to fight corruption, but it is very hard to detect. It's mostly easier to prevent. Okay, so that has been it for today. Thank you for joining us. Again, have a happy, very productive Monday. Again, my name is Michel Levien, or Michel Levien, either's fine. And this has been The Wife of Caesar. I'd like to leave you, as always, with one thing. Every act of corruption should be reported. Please do, if you come across an act of corruption, please gather your strength and blow the whistle. But only do so if you feel safe. If you, for whatever reason, don't know whether or not what you're looking at is corruption, or you don't feel entirely safe reporting it, refrain from doing so. And if you'd like, you feel free to write us at info@streiner.mx, and we will be glad to help you in any way we can. Again, I'm Michel Levien, and this has been The Wife of Caesar. Thank you very much.